Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am joined by Kevin Graham for the Axon Bulletin. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Hiya there, Paul. How are you getting on?
It's an absolute pleasure to have you back in the studio, Kevin, and we're going to be speaking about all things Celtic. We are going out live on YouTube, Facebook, and also Twitter, so please get the comments coming in, and we'll be chatting about transfers, we'll be chatting about Bolingoli, we'll be chatting about Tuesday night's game against Reykjavik, Kevin. So first and foremost, let's go right into transfer news. And Celtic again have been linked with a couple of defenders. What do you think of Omar Colley of Sampdoria, Aaron Hickey of Hearts?
I watch a lot of Italian football, and I can't say that Colley at Sampdoria's ever jumped out for me. But he seems to be quite highly rated. He's 27 years old. Mm-hmm. He would cost a fair amount of money.
How much are we looking at for him?
Well, the Italian newspaper says 15 million euros.
Was that what they value him at presently, 15 million?
That's what they value him at presently.
Mm-hmm.
But then I noticed one of the other gossip columns actually says he'd be available for about £5 million.
Right.
So, a big difference there. He seems like the type of player. I'm wondering if we're using this to flush out Shane Duffy. I'm wondering if we're using his name to try and do a deal with Brighton for them to lower their loan fee.
Playing the game, a wee bit like the Tony as well, using another player to try and get a bit of movement.
But that could be suggested as well, that we did do that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, because he just sort of appeared on the radar from nowhere, mm-hmm. and he seems like the type of player who would probably go to another Italian team rather than move out of Italy for me. So it's a bit of a left field name just to appear when the rumours are that the Duffy deal is in jeopardy because of the loan fee.
Right, so it's a name that's been thrown into the mix a wee bit like Ollie Burke, who's appeared on quite a few of the news sources, Kevin. Is there any truth in the Ollie Burke link to Celtic?
I don't want to say not. I don't want... That'll be really bad on Ollie Burke. But Ollie Burke has been at Celtic before, and apart from a decent start, he didn't really set the heather on fire. And we all know what Ollie Burke's faults are, mm-hmm. what he lacks, but also what he can contribute. And I would be very surprised if Neil Lennon did actually want to bring him back after basically not playing him in the running.
And being criticised by West Brom for not playing him.
Yes, so I'd be extremely surprised if that was the case, mm-hmm. because Burke would be on quite a big wage.
Well, when you look at the transfer fees, the deals that would have been done, Kevin, he'll be on a healthy wage. No doubt.
He is an athlete. He seems to have been one of these players who at youth football was bigger and stronger than everybody else, mm-hmm. and the coaches maybe saw an athlete who they could turn into a football player, and it hasn't quite happened yet. Maybe through no fault of the boy own, because you don't.
Boy's own.
Yes, that was a fanzine. That was a fanzine.
It was, yes.
Maybe no fault of his that he got the big move to Germany before he was actually ready for it, and his career has seemed to spiral downwards since that move to Red Bull Leipzig.
What you then see with players like that, Kevin, is numerous loan deals, and it's as though they don't have any roots.
Yes.
And they're looking for that next loan deal. Some clubs, some cultures and countries might work, some might not. And unfortunately for the player himself, is the transfer fee can plummet pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Would he be worth an investment of around the £5-6 million figure?
No. No, from his spell earlier at Celtic. Right. Unless he had done something, shown the coaching staff something that we didn't see. Mm-hmm. And that could well be the case. But I'm only going on what I saw and
what he's done since.
And the fact that Neil Lennon didn't play him when he was available the last time.
He didn't. Now, another player who has been in and around Celtic previously and who's been linked this week is young Aaron Hickey, who, of course, started off at Celtic and is now at Hearts. Is there a buy-back clause in that deal?
I don't think there is, but when I was reading it this morning, I do think it's utterly bizarre that Aaron Hickey is still only 18. Mm-hmm. I thought he was early 20s just because he seems to have been around for that long. At 18, he's still got a lot of development to do. You look at the other young guy that Hearts had, was it Harry Cochrane?
Yeah.
Who seemed to get burnt out very quickly. So maybe Hickey, even though he's had, I don't know how many first team games that he's had for Hearts, he's not the finished article yet, and there is still some development there. I mean, if he came into the Celtic squad, obviously we do need another left back, and I wouldn't be adverse to Aaron Hickey being Greg Taylor's understudy, because he will get games, and is he maybe more suited to a wing back role if we do go to the 3-5-2.
Maybe swap him for Bolingoli. Now, the other player you mentioned there, Shane Duffy. What's the update on Shane Duffy? You're saying there's an issue with the loan fee?
Well, those who seem to be in the know this morning are saying there's going to be an issue with the loan fee, and Celtic won't pay the £2 million to get Shane Duffy for a year. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the stick there is the fact is that Duffy's made it clear that he wants to come to Celtic, according to the people in the know. So we're in a bit of a standoff here.
An impasse.
So it's quite obvious that Duffy is Lennon's first choice, and his name's been leaked deliberately to try and force a move through to Celtic from both from the player's side or maybe our side, who knows. But it's an interesting. I can't say I've seen too much of Shane Duffy, but I'm going to have to go with guys who are more knowledge in football than me, who say he's a no-nonsense centre-half, and he's the type of centre-half that we need. And I'm going to trust Neil Lennon's judgment as well. We'll
come back to that, Kevin, because, you know, the tagline of today's show is all around Neil Lennon's signing policy and how perhaps Celtic's policy has changed, and we'll look at the reasons behind that. Is it an influence from Neil Lennon? Is it because we're going for 10 in a row and we're changing things in respect of something more immediate than the development side of it? Although we've just spoken about Aaron Hickey, who I think is actually made under 30 appearances for Hearts in total. So as you say, he would be a development player. So we'll come back to that, because there is a discussion to be had on the back of a tweet that I put out yesterday in relation to some of the players that we've actually offloaded this pre-season and early season, Kevin, all of whom had been purchased before Lennon came back as a manager. And it's my suggestion that our signing policy is moving towards signing players of a higher calibre and players who are less kind of a risk, if you like, because your £2 to £2.5 million market, the development players, of whom we have signed numerous over the last 10, maybe even longer, 15 years. For me, you're getting one success in 4, maybe one success in 5 even, but it's as though they're drying up as time goes on. People will point out Dembele. Unique circumstances behind the transfer fee of Dembele at the time, but, you know, he was the last one. You couldn't put Edouard in that category because it cost us £9 million. So it's something we'll come back to, because it sparked a wee bit of Twitter debate to the point where I was called a closet Hun, which was nice from fellow Celtic fans. But you've got to take these things you know, with a tongue-in-cheek, I think. So let's have a look over the weekend, Kevin. And we were being told that by the time Celtic kicked another domestic ball, would be 11 points behind the leaders. Didn't quite go to plan, did it? No, it didn't. And the live games that Sky have had over the last week, and I'm including our game against Kilmarnock in this, Sky will be asking for their money back because the 4 games that have been live, Scottish football's a hard sell as it is, but to have 2-0 each draws, and
a game, a 1-0 win for Hibs, and our game at Kilmarnock last week. It's been a dreadful selection of games for Sky recently, So, and it doesn't make, I think the lack of fans also in Scottish football makes the lack of quality at times more pronounced. You actually notice it more.
Right.
So it didn't happen yesterday. I mean, the Rangers were much the same as what we were against Kilmarnock the week before. The players that you expect to make a difference didn't make a difference. And you're going to get games like that. Just the same as we had games like that again. We had a game like that against Kilmarnock the week before. And there's going to be more games in the 36 games that we've got left that are like that. But then I'm really, really confident that if we win 30 of those 36 games, we'll win the league.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, yes, we were disappointed and we vented after the Kilmarnock game, but I wasn't getting too excited or concerned in relation to that, because there's going to be days like that throughout the season, as you say, Kevin. And of course, I think that the signings that we've been making and will make will be the biggest difference, actually, in refreshing that squad. And we'll come back to the way that Neil Lennon is approaching the signing, and perhaps changing the signing policy after, as I say previously, there's players like Marian Shved who we've just shipped out there, Kevin. I remember the famous or infamous interview with Brendan Rodgers after the boy had signed. He made it clear that he had nothing to do with the signing of that player, saying that he would be a good investment for the club, etc. He made it quite clear he had nothing to do with that. So I think there might be a couple of legacy buys in that mould that have come in under Neil Lennon. But when you look at the signings this pre-season and early season, we're looking at a different calibre of player, and that's going to be a big discussion point later on. But let's have a look at some of the comments coming in from Facebook, YouTube and also Twitter. And we've got a good afternoon, lads, from Glasgow Rebel. Good to have you back. Get involved in the chat. Thanks for tuning in. Gary Doonan: there's definitely been a change the last couple of years. Buying a 20-year-old for a club record of 9 million after a year loan, mainly playing second or third fiddle to Dembele and Griffiths season before, then 7 million on a relatively unknown defender, Julian. Also, he likes good players on loan, Foster and El Yunusi, unlike the loan deals under Brendan Rodgers like Weah, Burke and Toljan. What do you think of that, Kevin? I would agree with Gary Doonan. I think, the signing of Edouard was a bit of a watershed moment for Celtic.
I think basically, and Brendan Rodgers will admit this, that he says Edouard was one of the best young talents that he had seen at his age. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it was really a surprise that we did shell out the reported £9 million for him, because that talent was obvious on a daily basis at Lennoxtown when Brendan and the coaching staff were looking at him. And it was also maybe an easy gamble, because even though we've paid the 9 million, we will get more than 9 million back for him. Yes, it cuts into the profit, but it's more of a sure thing that we would get. We would be able to sell him on, unless he was an unmitigated disaster, which obviously he's proved not to be. He's actually proved probably to be better than Dembele, which is quite scary. If somebody
It's
would
a fair
ask
comment. It's a fair comment, especially when you look at the headlines that Dembele has made at the so-called top level of the game this week. It is a fair comment. Has Edouard made more of an impact than Dembele? I mean, that's an argument and a debate in itself. What do you think? All the listeners tuning in on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, I wanted it all. I wanted a partnership between the two. But when you look at the difference in styles as well, but for me, Dembele, from a defensive aspect, was always better. When you looked at the amount of headers he won defensively in his own box, Kevin, Dembele was fantastic at that.
Dembele and Edouard came at similar ages, but you could actually see Dembele had played men's football at that age, where Edouard had only played development football. He had one season on loan with Toulouse with Julian as well, but you could see Dembele had played in the English Championship. You could see he had developed his football intelligence more at 18-year-old than what Edouard had, and it's took Eddie a wee bit of time to catch up. But you can see that Eddie's got different attributes to Dembele. He's quicker, he's got a faster fleet of foot. He's now developing the hold-up game that Dembele had. that Dembele needed to have to be a success in the English Championship. I mean, it's no surprise when Dembele arrived, and we are going to discuss this, he came from Fulham, and it was only 6 months after Spurs had a £6 million bid accepted for him. But Spurs wouldn't loan him back to Fulham. That's how the deal fell through. Mm-hmm. So at that point, you've got a player that an elite English Premier League club feels is worth £6 million, and we get him for under 400 grand. So we were getting a player who was at a higher level than any other 18-year-old probably in British football at that point. Mm-hmm. So to see where he's went has been great, but he came to us at that level. And we knew that he could get better, and obviously he's done Man City again over the weekend, just like he done when he played for Celtic. And so it's been really, really great to watch Edouard's journey from that raw, rough youngster to what he is now.
Oh, definitely. And another question about Dembele: who runs his Twitter page? Because I don't think for a moment that it's actually Musa. Do you?
Is it not his agent?
I don't know, but he's on the noise up quite a bit, which is brilliant. Whoever it is that's running it,
I want it to be Musa.
So do I. But he would need to carry his phone about when he's playing, I think. Keep the questions and the comments coming in. Red Scotland, I would make Shane Duffy the number one target. I'd also be happy with Hickey as a left-back recruit to challenge Taylor, as you've mentioned already, Kevin. These positions must be added to, and only quality will do. We're going to be talking about the actual what I'm probably describing as a change in policy. It's maybe not, but it would appear that, you know, when you look at some of the guys we're shipping out, Kevin, and some of the money that we're losing and have lost, the counter argument that I read all weekend on Twitter was, but you know, players like Dembele offset that. I would rather have Dembele's profit to reinvest in another £7 million player than 2 to £2.5 million players who make absolutely no impact whatsoever.
It's old Porto thing, eh? Everybody looked at the Porto model and they say, and people would say Porto sell players for 30-40 million pound, then they bring in another player. But the player that they were bringing in was 9-10 million pounds. Mm-hmm. So they were getting a level of player. It was already 75% there to integrate into their team. They weren't taking a massive gamble on the top goal scorer of the Czech Republic League based on a recommendation by your assistant coach, which we've seemed to have done with Bayo. We may as well start naming names here, with Bayo. So when you have a look at, if you're selling, I probably agree with you, if you're selling Dembele for 19 million, then Edouard at 9 million is his replacement. That is, you've reinvested half that money in a player to replace him.
Yeah.
And so you're getting a different level of player of somebody. I mean, the perfect example is, Paul, QPR have paid £2 million for London Dykes. Mm-hmm. London Dykes is a terrible football player, but he's worth £2 million. Maybe that shows you what £2 million gets you now.
That's a great point, because I wouldn't take Lyndon Dykes for 2 million, 1.5, 1. I wouldn't take him. But if that's the level of player you get for 2 million, it's maybe no surprise that the 4 guys we've shipped off this pre-season, albeit 3 of them on loan, were around about that price figure. And we'll come back to them in just a few moments, because as I said, it got a lot of Twitter traction over the weekend. A lot of people picked it up on it as being a critical kind of viewpoint, and in many ways it probably is. But you're allowed to criticise Celtic. That's what people need to realise. It's not being negative to point out a deficiency in the club that you support. That's just you picking up on things that might frustrate you as a supporter. Gary Doonan, always good for making excellent points on the Axon Bulletin. Lennon was justified not playing Burke and Weah at times, as results and trophies showed. They weren't any better than Forest already in that 2019 running. And I think time has shown, as Gary says there, that Neil Lennon was 100% correct in his approach. Even with, you know, the likes of Toljan, who came in from Borussia Dortmund as a €7 million right back, and he was no better than what we had. He was absolutely no better. And again, there's the balance you need to strike, because you might have invested in that boy at €7 million. You would have maybe paid £5 million for him at the time, and you probably would have been disappointed in that purchase.
Definitely. And getting back to the Ollie Burke thing, again, that's what I'm saying. We're having a look. You can only have a look at the evidence that's there. And Neil Lennon never played him when the chips were down in that running. Now, maybe there's something in the background that Lennon told the player. By the way, I'm going with guys who are tried and trusted here because the pressure is unreal. I didn't want to put you under the pressure. Maybe Neil Lennon did fancy him as a football player, but just didn't want to shove him into that limelight when the club was in turmoil. And I've been very, very strong with my praise of Lennon, how he handled those last 4 months of the season. There is a book in that. That's a guide to crisis management. So maybe he did fancy Ollie Burke, but he just didn't want to introduce him to that. But as an outsider looking in, I can't see. I think the Ollie Burke name as an agent, I think it's an agent getting his name out there, trying to get more money for the Turkish teams. I really do.
I hope that's the case, Kevin. We'll dip back in and out of the transfer speculation because the comments are coming in thick and fast via Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. We're going out on a daily basis, sometimes a couple of times a day. That's going to increase, but we want you to be notified. We want you to get involved. So subscribe to us on YouTube. Everything we do is free of charge and we're increasing the content on a daily basis. So thanks for joining us. Just as an aside, Kevin, we've not really mentioned volleyball and goalie. We all know what the situation is with him, but the COVID row continues. It rumbles on. Over the last few days, we've had Celtic legend Kenny Dalglish stating that there should be no points deductions. The man speaks sense. On the flip side, you've got Hibs coming out and you've got Chris Boyd coming out saying that points should be deducted. What's your take on some of these comments from the likes of Boyd?
I listened to your Bulletin on Saturday. Well, I watched on YouTube. And I agree. If there was going to be a points deduction, it had to be set in stone before the season kicked off.
Yes. And
this retrospective want for a body, for people to be made an example of, is just typical Scottish football. It's shutting the door after the horse is basically bolted. And I'm mentioning horses again, and I'll need to stop mentioning horses.
Obsessed with horses.
But that's what it seems to me. Now, I read somewhere today that the Hibs chairman, I don't even know his name, the American guy, he was...
Is it Les Gold? Something like that?
I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, the Hibs chairman, based in America, who was quote, there was a headline that says that he wanted a points deduction.
Yeah. When
you actually read his quote, he didn't want a points deduction. He says that the points deduction had to be written into the rules going forward if that was going to be the case. Yeah. But that doesn't make a good headline, eh?
No.
And it's the
that
same,
doesn't suit the narrative.
No, not at all. And I'm pretty sure that there wouldn't be this clamour for point deductions if it was other teams. If it wasn't Celtic and Aberdeen, I'm sure there wouldn't be this clamour. Now, I read somewhere as well that the players could get an 8-game suspension.
Yes.
Imagine those 8 Aberdeen players getting an 8-game suspension. That's Aberdeen's season in jeopardy.
In absolute turmoil. Yeah, you're right. And again, even without the points deduction, they may end up losing more than 3 points or whatever it may have been. But it is interesting that the narrative, and it's to be expected, Kevin. We've seen it and heard it all before. If Celtic are involved, then they're trying to get the points deducted. Supposedly we were going to be 11 points behind the next time we kicked the ball. Doesn't look as though that's going to happen. Let's have a wee chat before we get back to transfer news about tomorrow night. It's our first game back after a kind of self-imposed layoff. We're up against Reykjavik. Yesterday, the other day, Saturday, we spoke about the possible lineups and we spoke to Jim Simonetti and our 2 guests from St Roch's, Andy Cameron and Stevie Mullen, about potential lineups. And probably, as to be expected, we all had a different team. Hopefully everybody at home's enjoying the sound and the vision today, because we've been working hard over the last 3 weeks to get that just right for everybody who's tuning in. If there are any issues, just tell us, comment, and we'll see if there's anything at this end that we can improve on. But keep the comments coming in. How do you think it will go tomorrow night is the next point of discussion. Kevin Graham, tell us your lineup, how you would set that team up, what shape you would go for, and how do you see the game going?
My lineup is based on what Neil's played during pre-season and in the first couple of games of the league. So I reckon he's going to set up a 4-2-3-1, what is a normal formation. We've got Barkas in goal. I see Al Hamed coming in at right back because I think he is our first choice right back. Yuli and I are the two centre backs with Greg Taylor. Brown, Callum McGregor, Forrest, Christie, Mo and Eddie up top. Now, for me, with that formation, it can switch to a 3-5-2 without making a sub, because you can move El Hamed back into a back three and put Mo up front with Eddie.
Has it been confirmed, Kevin, keep me right on this one, about Ajeti? Is he able to play tomorrow night?
I'm not 100% sure.
Right, because other than that, your team is very similar to Andy Cameron of St Roch's, who would line up very similar to that. And Andy obviously was pushing also for Lee Griffiths to get involved. Can you see an appearance even on the bench for Griff?
It's interesting. It's been a strange week without us having any Lee Griffiths controversy. So hopefully the next time we see Lee Griffiths is on taking the field in a Celtic jersey, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's on the bench tomorrow night, as we're allowed the nine subs in European competition, ain't we?
Someone at home will tell us. I mean, I was taking that for granted, but I'm pretty sure one of the listeners can keep us right with that.
If we are, you made a great point. If you can't get into a 20-man match day squad, then there's something up.
Yeah, and I made that point about Shved because when I mentioned the fact that he had played one game and he'd cost us a lot of money, really, it was a fair investment in wages and transfer fees, that a lot of people came back and says, well, he didn't get a chance. My argument is Shved got a chance every single day in training to impress Neil Lennon, and he's obviously not impressed. There's been other things suggested, Kevin, about learning the language, for example, and if there wasn't enough commitment there on the player's part. That's all hearsay as far as I'm concerned. I don't know anything about that. But, you know, for a player to be under scrutiny on a daily basis on a training pitch, if you're not in a 20-man squad, that's down to the player.
Correct. And I heard the language thing as well, and that could just suit a narrative which is being peddled by certain people. You have a look at Swed. He failed when he went to Spain as a young laddie. He went back to the Ukraine, started tearing up the Ukraine again. He looks very, very decent at international level for the Ukraine, at the youth levels and under 21 level. So he was probably the type of signing that Celtic should have made. But if he's came back in, his attitude hasn't been right, he hasn't proved it in training, then maybe the lad just can't settle in a foreign country. It could be something as simple as that. If the club have tried everything to help him, like get settled, put him in touch with other Ukrainians in Scotland who could help teach him English, get him a decent pad to stay in Glasgow, really try to integrate him into the Glaswegian community and the Celtic community in Glasgow, then, and he hasn't taken that on board, then there's no much more Celtic can do. There's a great story about the Brazilian striker at Everton. He used to play for Crystal Palace, and he was struggling. His name will come back to me probably in about 10 minutes. He was struggling at Crystal Palace when he moved to London, and what Crystal Palace done was they put him in touch with some of the Brazilian community in London. They moved him into the Brazilian community in London. They got him to a supermarket which sell Brazilian goods. The weight dropped off him, and he got a £40 million move to Everton. So that's... Clubs sometimes need to... These are young laddies coming into a different country.
Yeah.
And you have a look over the lockdown as well. I was very surprised Eddie stayed. He stayed in Glasgow.
He did, yes.
So... and obviously nobody really knows if his claim that he can't speak English is right or wrong.
Edward?
Either he's just...
Maybe it's the old Nakamura trick, eh?
Taking the mickey there, eh? But for a young laddie at 19, at 21, to stay in lockdown in Glasgow, that's a sign of commitment. That's a sign of a young lad who is comfortable where he is. And maybe Swed just never had that. But if the club have done everything that they can and he hasn't done it in training, then I can't see his loan move working out, and I can't see him making a impact in a Celtic jersey.
No, we will come back to it, Kevin, but great points you make. Let's have a look at some of the comments coming in via YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Jez5959, welcome back. Can't afford to go for someone who would need a season to settle in. Splash the cash for Duffy. I think that's one of the big points we're going to be making about these so-called development signings, Kevin. As important as they are, we have spent a lot of money down the years on £2 to £2.5 million players who have made very little impact. By and large, you do get the odd nugget in there, but not so much these days, really. When you look at the list of players that we've sold on, Gary Doonan, 2 years ago at Celtic Youths, young players like Daniel Church and Kerr McEnroy were well ahead of Hickey. And Gary would know because he's involved in youth football, and it just shows you, we are getting a lot of second-hand information about how many of the 30 games have we actually seen him playing for Hearts. And it will be interesting. He certainly isn't going to walk into the Celtic side. He's not going to be a first choice if he was to join, is he?
The other thing is, you look at the other clubs that are interested in him. Bayern Munich being one. Now, Bayern Munich have recently took Liam Morrison. They're going to take Barry Hepburn from Celtic as well.
Yeah.
So they want Aaron Hickey. So Aaron Hickey is not going to Bayern Munich to play in their first team. He's going to play alongside Barry Hepburn and Liam Morrison. He's there to develop. So there's no difference coming to a club like Celtic, but he would get more of a first team opportunity at Celtic.
Sure.
So it's an interesting choice for young Aaron. And at 18, could you turn down going to Bayern Munich though?
Well, this is a big thing. I mean, obviously, I always remember back when, obviously, John Collins signed for Celtic, a wee bit different. But Rangers tried to come in at the last minute and offer him more money. And he was true to, his instincts, Kevin, and he came to Celtic. I think if you go back a few years and you're maybe 18, 19, the lure of Bayern Munich, it could work two ways. Because a lot of the guys at that age, you've just spoken about Shved, it must be difficult at that age to go to a different country. I mean, he's a young kid. You're talking about Shved there, but he's a few years younger than Shved. And of course, if they've already got a contingent of Scottish players in there, that's always going to help. So, interesting times for young Hickey. Ken Walsh, who is a long-time listener to a Celtic State of Mind, welcome back, Ken. He tells us the Derry boy would be a great signing, never had a bad game in an Irish jersey.
I'll take Ken's word for that.
I will take Ken's word on that. Thanks very much. And Red Scotland states that if Shane Duffy is Neil's first choice, then the duty of the board is to back the manager, spend the money on permanently signing the player. Penny pinching will not be tolerated by fans this season. And again, this actually feeds into the point we're going to be making about the policy, because I do think there has been a change in that policy. Gary Doonan, welcome back. There's going to be more of these types of weekends. Fans need to keep the head. So you think back to the Kilmarnock aftermath, and everybody, looking at that performance, which was poor. And obviously the media narrative was that Rangers are going to be 11 points ahead. It's all about just remaining calm. Neil Lennon's been here before. And, Scott Brown's been here before. We've got the personnel, Kevin, to get us through this situation. It would have been much better going into the Rekovic game with another couple of games under our belt. That's got to be said. It's not ideal, but I still think we're going to have enough to get through that tie. You never told us how you think that's going to end up. That's
the biggest disappointment of this week, missing the two games, that we haven't had two more competitive games before Reykjavik. Now, what you've got to look at Reykjavik, and you have to have a look at these teams that we face in these Champions League qualifiers. Now, Reykjavik are a semi-professional side. So you've got to probably guess that they're off the same level of maybe a top-end championship club, or maybe a bottom-end Scottish Premier League club. Now, if we were going into a one-off game against, say, a Dunfermline, for example, you would expect Celtic to get through. It might be stodgy, it might be stuffy, but you would still expect Celtic.
As it was last season.
Yeah. You would still expect Celtic to get through. The biggest thing is, with it being a one-off game, anything can happen in a one-off game. Look at Lincoln Red Imps, like that one-off. But you knew full well that we were going to overturn that at Celtic Park. The lightning wasn't going to strike twice at Celtic Park, but now we've got a one-off game. A one-off that anything can happen. The players have got to be on it right from the first minute. And I reckon if we score early enough, we'll have a comfortable evening with no frights whatsoever, and I'm looking for a comfortable evening. I'm looking for a 2-3-0 victory. Then we move on to the harder challenge. We move on to two teams that would probably finish in the top 6 in the Scottish Premier League.
Sure.
And then it becomes a lot more difficult. It's great that it's at home, but I don't know how much home advantage is going to matter when there's no crowd there.
The only real advantage, obviously, as well as the familiarity, is the lack of travel. And no matter how far the travel is, that lack of travel is obviously going to feed into it as well. But I think, I'm not going to say it's going to be comfortable, Kevin, but I think it will be a comprehensive victory, and we'll move on to the domestic game after that.
If we score early enough, maybe we go. I'm thinking of the game that we played last year against the team for Estonia, and we scored 2 goals in the first half, and the second half almost became another pre-season game, where guys got a chance to stretch their legs, a chance to get up to speed again. In a perfect world, I would want that to happen. Just get another, because it will be rusty again, because they've had a week without a game.
Yeah.
So, a couple of wee early goals and a chance for them to stretch their legs and get back into speed of things for what is going to be a tough game on Saturday against Dundee United.
Oh, it definitely will be, without a doubt. Let's go back to some of the comments being made via Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, free of charge. We're giving you daily content. We're talking all things Celtic. We're providing interviews. There was a great interview last week, actually, Kevin, with Michael Jobson. An interesting life the man has led, from Ballingery to the Bunnymen, I think I called it. Played live with Echo and the Bunnymen, managed the tours of Amy Winehouse, Doves, Richard Ashcroft, and it just so happens he's a Celtic fan.
That usually happens. All these interesting people seem to be Celtic fans, and they've all got great stories to tell, and this is what AXOM's always been about, Paul, ain't it? It's been about letting these people tell their stories. And I mean, everybody knows the more famous brother,
Richard. Yes.
So it was interesting to hear Michael's side of the show business game.
His other brother cuts my hair. There you go. Right, so from Facebook, hail guys, we should be getting on this 5-player loan. We do need backup with a lot of games under a short space of time. I think I've said we should play the loan market. We've played it particularly well previously, Kevin. So that would be interesting if we get Shane Duffy in on loan, £2 million. It seems like a big fee, but we'll be coming back to the amount of £2 million we've actually chucked down the drain previously. Northampton Tim, hail boys, and hail to you. Thanks for joining us. Keep the comments coming in. Mark Feely 6, we need to be paying more money for semi-established players, and our aim should be the Champions League groups. I put that question out this morning on an article on axom.net written by our Hungarian correspondent Kevin McCluskey, who asked the question, what happens after 10 in a row? Should we get it? And a lot of people are happy with domestic bliss, Kevin. They're quite happy with the dominance at home, whereas other people are saying, we should be looking forward to Champions League progression. I must say I'm in the latter category, and I think the only way to get that is by playing our football elsewhere. But again, that's another discussion for another bulletin.
I think it's quite interesting. If you sign players for higher transfer fees, when we do eventually sell them on, it means the profit is not as much. But if you've got 3 years in the Champions League or 2 years in the Champions League from them, then you've made your profit other ways. So it is an interesting balance to try and strike.
It is, and we've struck the balance fairly well. This is the thing, people get a wee bit defensive if you start questioning what Celtic have done in the transfer market. I think my biggest issue with this is just the plethora of players that we've spent £2.5 million transfer fees on. Then you've got the wages over and above that, and they've hardly kicked a ball. Then they get a loan deal, or they go back to another club on a nominal fee, Kevin, or the loan deal is a loan to buy, or a loan just to run down the contract, as it seems will be the case with Jack Hendry. And these are the frustrations for me as a Celtic fan, because if you add up the millions we've lost, it's an astronomical amount of money. We've got another comment coming in from Red Scotland. Ajax did similar with players they bought to get them to recent Champions League final. They bought a higher level of youngster, and they profited on and off the pitch at a time when Celtic's wage budget was higher.
That's a magnificent point. the way Ajax changed their system for a few years to bring in more experienced players. They brought in the guy from Southampton, and basically you look at that Ajax team that got to the Champions League semi-final that Spurs flukily bet. That team was split up after a year, but the money that Ajax spent, they got back 3 or 4 times. So that's a great point by Red Scotland.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
it is. Thanks, keep them coming. Ken Walsh, welcome back. Just to keep us updated, apparently Griffiths is still injured, according to Lennon, so he's still got a wee calf strain. And he won't be featuring tomorrow, so hopefully we do see a Jetty. Will we play with 2 up front? That's going to be the interesting point, I think. Will we play with the 2 up front? I think at Celtic Park, I'd like to see it.
Again, it'll be up to Neil. It'll be up to the coaching staff to see how Ayete's actually settled into the team. How he's linked up, how he looks, how far from fitness has he been. So that'll all play on the coaching staff's mind, and it'll all come into a factor into whether we see him tomorrow or not.
I always think back to George Cadetti, and obviously we know that we were deliberately held back on playing Cadetti due to the registration issues that Fergus McCann pursued and won against Jim Farry. But he was placed on the bench. You know, Tommy Burns could have played him that night against Aberdeen from the start. He was on the bench, itching to get on. First thing he does is he blows the radio waves off air because he scored that brilliant wee chip against Aberdeen. It was a game, I think it was live on domestic TV that night, I think.
It was. I was at the game, It was magnificent. It was a Monday night for some utterly bizarre reason.
And
it was
Stuart
a Monday
Gray
night.
was playing and he had the same kind of hair as Cadetti, remember? But all I'm saying is a Jetty and Cadetti rhyme, so surely we can get that Cadetti song into an Jetty song, no?
Well, we'll leave that to the good lads at the Green Brigade to come up with something magical like they've done. Creative, magical like they've done so many times over the last couple of years.
Celtic fans are a creative bunch, as we've said.
You leave it to the experts, Paul.
This is one for you, I think, Kevin, because he's a player that you have championed for a long time, Olivier Encham. And Martin Devine has commented via Twitter to say that we need to keep Encham at all costs. He's a guy you think he's the best technician in Scottish football. When you hear that some clubs might be sniffing around with bids of around 20 million for Encham, what do you do with a guy like that? Because, and I'm not saying he's a like-for-like replacement for Scott Brown, but Scott Brown won't be playing every week. Encham in the midfield. Well, I mean, would you let him go to strengthen elsewhere?
I love him. I love the player, but if somebody's offering £20 million for him, for a player who Neil Lennon doesn't see as a first choice midfielder, then unfortunately you take it. I'll put it another way. If somebody offered 40 for Eddie or 20 for Cham, you're taking Cham.
Okay, interesting point.
I love the player. I don't want to lose him, but I would understand the football thinking.
And also, as a player, Kevin, he's at an age where he needs to be playing far more regularly because he's not a regular, he's not a first pick. He shows moments, absolute
genius,
magic in a Celtic jersey. It would be great, I think, to see him in a prolonged period within the first team as a first pick. But that is the area of the field that we are probably strongest at. So it's one of these things, if we get offered £20 million, it'll be an interesting dilemma for the Celtic board to consider. Simon Leach, thanks for clarifying that Lennon has already said in his interview that Ajeti will be on the bench.
Okay.
So get the songs ready because he's got hair like Cadetti. No, he doesn't. But, you know, that song was a fan's favourite back in the day. Let's have a wee chat about the tweet I sent out yesterday. Basically, simple maths, someone called it, and it certainly is. But when you look at Kouassi, Bayo, Sved, and who was the fourth player? Hendry. 4 players that were shipped out, 3 on loan this pre-season and the early part of the season. And you look at the combined transfer fees, and this isn't even talking about wages. For every 90 minutes played, combined, 220 grand. That's how much it cost. Throw in the wages and it's cost you $250,000 for every 90 minutes you've got back. Now, it was just one example of this pre-season. I wasn't talking about 10 years ago or selling Dembele, but it did spark a good debate, Kevin. But I think what I took from it was whether or not things have changed under Neil Lennon. When I look at the signings that he's made, you're looking at Foster coming in, El Yunusi, Ajeti, Barkas, that type of player. I would suggest is a higher calibre than what we have been looking at previously. And I know what Gary Doonan said with regards to Julien and Edouard, so maybe that had already started before now. Are we now realising that the market for 2 to 2.5 million players, that hidden Wanyama, that hidden Van Dijk, is no longer there, or they're harder to find?
They are harder to find, but the two players that you mentioned there, Virgil and Wanyama. Virgil came from the Dutch league. Wanyama came from the Belgian league. Yeah. Wanyama had already been on trial at Manchester City. So, yes, if you look at the 6 players that we've sold for our top money, you've got Kieran Tierney at the top, then you've got Moussa Dembele, Virgil, Victor Wanyama, Fraser Foster, and Aidan McGeady. So 2 of them have came from Lennoxtown. 2 of them have played in England, and 2 of them have played at the top level in Europe. So you're getting a different level of player there to your Swed, your Bayo, your Jack Hendry, and your Kouassi. Your Kouassi had only played 19 games in the Russian league, and I think the majority of them were in the Europa League before we took the punt. I remember a scout saying to me, when these guys have had a great first season, then play 60, 70 first team games, they're then out your price range.
Yes.
Now, if there's a player in the Dutch league, and we've spoke about this at length, and we spoke about this with the guys at the Anfield Wrap that day when they came up to speak about Van Dijk. If Van Dijk was playing in Holland today, he would be in the Bundesliga after 30 or 40 games. He would be out our price range. I mean, we spent £2.5 million on Virgil van Dijk at the time, and I remember thinking at the time, that's a lot of money, because we were only spending 900 grand, £1 million, and to go for 2.4 million for a centre half who had only had 1.5 decent seasons in the Dutch league was a lot of money for us. When you look at where we're buying the players from now, they are better leagues. We seem to be looking at the English market more, which means the players are going to be more expensive, which usually means that the players don't really need to adapt to Scottish football because they're used to the British culture, the British style of play. I remember talking to when Bayo made his debut at Greenock, and I'm sure Kevin Tate was there as well.
Yeah, the development game.
They played the development game and they played Falkirk. I know one of the players who played for Falkirk that day, and I'll paraphrase him, he says, if Bayo had turned up at Falkirk, we would have wondered who had scouted him. That was his exact words. Now, you can put it down to a young laddie coming to a country, but to have another professional football player say that, it makes you wonder right away if this guy was ever going to make it. Jack Hendry, again, another young player who had moved to England, failed in England and came back up and had another good 6 months. And
we know who scouted him. And the words he says to me, the immortal words that will never leave me, is that he was turning in performances like Beckenbauer. Now that is what was scouted back to Brendan Rodgers when Jack Hendry signed. And that was from the horse's mouth, to mention the horse again, Kevin.
Now, can you really blame Brendan Rodgers for then signing?
Well, if you believe for a minute anybody that's turning in performances like Beckenbauer for Dundee, then you're taking a risk. You're taking a massive risk there, Kevin, aren't you?
I've seen Ravanelli play for Dundee, so anything can happen in Dundee.
You never know.
You never know. But again, we've started going further down the leagues, into minnow leagues, trying to find a star.
Trying to find the next Virgil.
Trying to find the next Virgil, because we can't get them from Holland anymore. You look at Mo and you look at Aeti. Both of them were on our radar when they were playing in Switzerland.
Yes.
One of them was on our radar when he played in Norway. But the transfer fees were just too rich for us. Now we're getting them because they've went to England. And as I said last week, English clubs can discard players because they've got that much money. And then we can come in and pick them up. There will be better players for having played in England, and so we need to have a look at that market now. We really do. We also need to have a look at the development market down in England as well. We can't just run away from the development market. You look at the academy market. All these elite clubs have got massive academies.
Well, that's how we've benefited from Frimpong.
Yeah. You got O'Connor for Man United as well.
Luke O'Connell obviously had played first-team football.
Played first-team football for Bolton. There is a saying, and Jim says it to me earlier on, and it's in Michael Calvin's book as well, that 70% of academy players give up by the time that they're 21 if they don't make the first team of their academy squad. So you look at these clubs who stockpile players, so one or two actually make it. There's gems in there. We've got one with Frimpong. We could have one with O'Connor. So that looks like, when we're looking at the development now, that looks like the market that we're looking in. And we're also looking at players who are playing at a higher level than the ones that we've previously. So I'm more than happy with that. I really am more than happy with that. But that eats into the profit. And I'm not talking here as an accountant, I'm not talking here as a member of the board, but that will be a consideration for the board. Yeah. I've already mentioned in the last half hour about the £2 million fee for a loan being a stumbling point.
It eats into the profit, Kevin, but as you quite rightly said, the balance is you do better in Europe.
Do better in Europe.
Potentially.
Now, you go back, did we know, what was the loan fee for Charlie Masonda? Was that not about £2 million?
It was astronomical, yeah. For
the 18 months. So we've paid it before, and it could be a case that we've had our fingers burnt there, and we're not paying £2 million again for a loan fee. Surely we had a loan fee for Foster last year as well.
Yes, and Elyounoussi.
So we're used to playing that market, and if Shane Duffy has made it clear that he wants to come to Celtic, then we have to find a way of making it happen.
Let's make it happen. Now, Kevin, you're talking about academy players giving up the game. I know for a fact you hold your own football record, 187 appearances as an unused substitute for the Newmarket Sunday League team.
Yes.
Well done, and that's why you're on here, because that kind of expertise cannot be bought. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us on a Celtic State of Mind's Bulletin. Your contribution is always welcome. All that's left for me to say is thank you to Kevin Graham for joining us on a Celtic State of Mind.
Thank you.